You need to have three core things to make a certification successful. You have to have market fit. Will it sell? Method, will it work? Means that the actual method that you're teaching works in the real world. And then the last piece is your model. Will it stick? And that's where you have a way to be describing it quickly in a way that helps people remember and reinforce the behaviors that you have taught them in the method, and it makes it really easy to be sharing about it.
Welcome to the Intangible Brand, where we explore the connection between employee experience and client experience and the hidden forces that make brands stick. I'm Jerry Gennaria, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Carl Winstead. And today we're talking with Pamela Slim. She's the author of a couple of different books and a speaker and the founder of the Pamela Slim Agency. And she spent nearly 3 decades helping leaders turn their ideas into scalable systems, from certification programs to licensing models that expand impact without losing quality. Those books I mentioned include Escape from Cubicle Nation, Body of Work, and The Widest Net. And they've helped guide thousands of people who want to build meaningful careers and businesses. And that's why we're here to help you do the same thing. So Pam, thank you so much for being here on the Intangible Brand. It's great to have you on the show.
I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome.
Yeah, Pam, welcome. Again, I'll echo Jerry's thoughts. We just appreciate you taking time to talk with us. You've got some very interesting things, and I can't wait to dive into this little bit. One of the things I find fascinating is you really have helped thousands of people move from corporate life into building something of their own. And that's a pretty unique sort of journey and a place to be. So I'm just wondering, as we kind of get started, maybe you could walk us through your own journey. What led you from, consulting with sort of national major corporations to helping entrepreneurs design and scale their own direction.
Absolutely. So I've been in business 29 years, and my last real job was at Barclays Global Investors in San Francisco. I was the director of training and development. And I actually have always loved work in general. I love my corporate life. So even though I wrote the book Escape from Cubicle Nation, I've never been anti-corporate. I am more pro people doing work that they really enjoy. So the early roots in my career were all around community development, learning and development, where again, I got in a formal role of leading training for a firm. And then I left in about 1996 and I opened up my own consulting practice, which for about 10 years, I built a lot of programs for large companies. So for people like Charles Schwab or Hewlett Packard, I worked on management development curriculum for them, really as an outsourced provider of training. And I love that work. So I did all kinds of work throughout the country, doing a lot of large scale change management initiatives in big companies, which I really loved. I've always just looked at the human side of business, which I find fascinating, which is why I love the combination of the work you two do together, because I am passionate about the employee experience and I'm also passionate about the client experience. And I feel like usually it's rare when you get both really aligned. You can have strength in one or the other. So
Right.
I've always loved to look at
Yeah.
that connection. And for me, after the about 10 years of consulting, I found that a lot of people were coming up to me. Sometimes the clients had hired me to retain their employees and were saying, how did you do it? How did you leave and go out on your own? So that led to the early stages of Escape from Cubicle Nation that started as a blog. And then I attracted a book deal from Penguin Random House, Portfolio Imprint. And so that started really probably almost 20 years of doing a lot of early stage work with people where I found there were unique qualities to corporate employees who were starting a business that might be different for somebody who grew up in an entrepreneurial family. So I did a lot of that work. And then in the last couple of years, I don't know if you all have found it, if you've been in business a long time, but I found I was wanting to go back around a little bit to the more mature businesses and look at ways to scale that really leveraged all the experience I had of deeply understanding the world of B2B and how training was deployed in organizations. So
Right.
now I serve expert clients who are often wanting to sell into these large environments. And so it's really bringing together a lot of my own body of work, to quote myself. And so it's really an exciting thing because I'm just leveraging a lot of different experience together.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing now and this idea of literally turning ideas into systems. It could be a business model, or as you said, a body of work, or maybe like a certification program. What drew you to this idea of codifying knowledge as a kind of growth strategy?
For me, it comes to my roots of loving performance improvement and learning and development because an idea is just an idea. We've all read
Hmm.
really cool books and maybe thought to
Mm,
ourselves, that's really cool. I don't see it ever really working in the real world. To me, what's
right.
interesting is how an idea is translated into usually something like a method or a model or a system so that real people in the real world can actually have the transformation promised in the book by going through the process. And
Mm.
that is something I find that is just always what it is that I'm looking for. I love to brainstorm and, think of things, dream as much as anybody else does, but really where I get excited, what I pay attention to is people who have taken a challenging problem and where they have created something very sticky and useful that ends up helping people concretely. I think about a good friend of mine, Mike Michalowicz, as some of you might know Mike, who wrote Profit First, along with a bunch of other great books.
Yeah.
He's a great example of somebody who really leverages models and methods that he writes about in his books. He gets partners that he works with that create specific certifications. So now you have the Profit First professionals that are using the ideas and the method in his great book, Profit First, but they're using it as bookkeepers and accountants with their clients so that their clients experience a lot more peace of mind, better cash flow, more consistent financial growth. And so for me, that's just the magic of it is I love both those worlds. I don't get so excited about just any idea or anything to be systematized. I do care about what kinds of ideas are we moving forward that really are intended to create a better experience for people, to make the
Mhm.
world a better place.
Hmm.
And that's why I get so excited of working with everybody from data scientists to physicians to people who are really fundamentally changing the world that we live in.
You're almost
Interesting.
helping them kind of franchise their idea, monetize it beyond just, I have this thing and either I'm speaking about it, writing about it, or practicing it as a consultant, but you're letting them scale this to many, many people who are using a methodology that they're effectively getting paid for. Is that an
That's
accurate
right. And
summation?
Mhm.
That's right, and franchise, as we know, is a very specific business model that
Sure.
sometimes can have more implications like you might have for a brick and mortar or restaurant, well-known things like McDonald's or Taco Bell or maybe a spa, Massage Envy, something like that. So you can have that model. The interesting thing about the different form that licensing or certification can take is it can be very concrete, like in the Profit First example I gave. You write about the method, people learn the method, they implement it. Or it can be more creative. I worked with Susan Cain, the author of Quiet, about the power of introverts.
Hmm.
And we worked on a deal with Steelcase that made quiet spaces, which were office spaces designed for introverts. And so they were really
Oh,
using the incredible IP ideas and research that Susan created in her many millions of copies selling book. But it was implemented in such a way that was really, really interesting, in which that design criteria from the ideas around where introverts can thrive impacted the way to design spaces according to that. Other ways we often see people licensing, if they happen to be famous, if they're, athletes, they have their own shoes. If they're actors or singers, they have their own perfumes. We see a lot of those kinds of licensing deals where people are lending their brand or their name to a
Hmm.
specific product. But I think around the world of ideas, it is looking for these places in which ultimately the method or the model can be installed inside companies and cultures, really, so it becomes part of the way that things get done. But the person that is the creator of that still gets some financial benefit by having a licensing agreement. Remember back in the day, way back at Barclays Global Investor times, every new hire would get a Franklin Covey planner and we'd go through the Franklin Covey training. And, that
Right.
was something there.
Yeah.
I know the company is still around, but it really was a decision that they made saying this particular outside product really fits with our values and the way that we run our programs. So you imagine if you're lucky enough to be somebody who is selling into that, that can be a really beautiful stream of revenue for the business.
Yeah.
That's great.
Interesting.
Jerry, I wonder if you and I could be licensed. I mean, I just thinking maybe there's something there?
Yeah. I just like dog licenses, or what do you
I
think,
don't
Not
know.
really
Carl?
licensing an individual, but
But bobbleheads?
Um, yeah. Well, Pam, Jerry mentioned in the kind of the introduction when he introduced you, talking about some of the books that you've authored, and I think that all three of those are sort of tied to maybe a different season of your own evolution. You talk about Escape from Cubicle Nation, Body of Work, and The Widest Net.
Mhm.
I'd be interested to kind of know, do you see a thread that connects them? They're different, but what is that? What's that common thread?
Absolutely. The subtitle for Body of Work is Finding the Thread That Ties Your Story Together. So I really think about that myself. I always define myself as an author practitioner, and that I write about things that I work
Mm-hmm.
with every single day. I'm informed by my clients, by questions that they have and what they want and need as we're accomplishing different things. So I wrote Escape from Cubicle Nation intended to give an accurate picture for
Mm-hmm.
people who were considering entrepreneurship to one of two ends. Either they would read about what's involved and they would say, "Oh, that's way too much work. I would rather make my job work for me and not take the leap." Or
Yeah.
they would realize that it was possible and it was a fit for them, but they would do so in a way that was responsible, usually working with a side hustle where they were sure that they had more of a strong financial foundation when they landed
Yeah.
on their feet. So that was my approach to escape. Once people get out and they have a solid foundation, usually what they're looking for next is, what really is that body of work that I want to create? How can I be
Mm-hmm.
specific about the product, services, or business that I want to create that's beyond just having a paycheck or replacing my corporate income? The other
Gotcha.
purpose of body of work is I found a lot of people at the time that the book came out in 2009 were so excited about entrepreneurship. They said the only way to be cool, creative, and free is working for yourself. That I thought was quite limited. What
Mm-hmm.
about people who work for you in your own company? Are they not cool, creative, and free? What about
Yeah.
people who work in universities and governments? So when you think about a body of work, it is whether or not you are working as an entrepreneur, it is the focus is, what are you creating and contributing to the
Yeah.
world through your work that can be different at different stages of your life. Once people know what they want to build, the next question is, where are my clients? Where's my audience? Where are my people? And so the widest net came from that exploration, that is a very specific way that you can center your client. And as opposed to empire building, where we might say, I am the sole expert that can solve all of my clients'
Mm-hmm.
problems, and I call my, audience fans, followers, which is really centered around me. I make the argument in the widest net, if we center our client in the center of an ecosystem, we are one of many partners who are helping that client to solve the complex problems that they have. And the more that we are doing it together, the better it is for our clients and the better it is for our business, because
Right.
that's where we know other really competent professionals to refer them to. I'm not sure if you're DC or Marvel folks, but it's either the Justice League or the Avengers. I
Yeah.
always think of what is just that best crew that if we had 30 minutes to save our clients before the earth blew up, then who would you call? Who is the very best web designer? Who is the very best accountant? Whatever the business problem would be,
Sure.
that is who you want to be surrounding your clients with. So that's really the genesis of the widest net. And there's a very specific system by which you can build your business that way. The next book I'm working on right now actually is called Remember Who You Are. And so it's like, when all of that is humming and it's working and you're building something important, how can you really stay grounded in being the kind of leader that feels good about what you're doing, that is leveraging your strengths, and is not always looking out at somebody else, wishing that you were a different kind of leader?
Yeah.
Which I
Mm,
find a lot of people do. They can have
Right.
tremendous success, but their measuring stick is always somebody else that by definition is impossible. We can only live up to our own standards. So
Yeah.
that's where the questions have come next, which is the next book that I'm working on right now.
Great. Well, we look forward to talking about that when that comes out and reading it.
yeah,
Me too.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
I love that thread that's connecting them together, but I particularly love everything that's in The Widest Net, which if folks haven't read it, they absolutely need to read it. And it's it's informed some of how we're approaching things with Toki, as a firm, and I think it really leverages another idea. So I don't know if you're familiar with David Baker, who wrote the Business of Expertise.
Yes, yes,
So
David's what awesome. Mhm.
yeah, exactly. David is awesome. And the concept behind that book about um, understanding what your niche is and what your unique
Mhm.
expertise is, and honing in on that, particularly as a small business, as an entrepreneur, is it's very freeing, and it's also makes it a lot easier to tell your story, to sell who you are, and I think one of the challenges that we face, particularly in some sort of consulting settings, is
Mm.
wanting to solve all of our clients' problems, and starting to take on things that we're not necessarily the best at. So,
Yes.
for us, that would mean trying to be experts in PR or SEO or something like that, that is not our
Mhm.
core strength. So it's much better
Right.
for us. And what's interesting is, as I've been working the last 6 years or so, really focused in the AEC space where a lot of our listeners are, and other kinds of professional services. But I really notice this in AEC is I think there's an intuitiveness to that in that space, because you're used to the idea of, who's the general contractor and who are the subs, who's the prime
Mhm.
Yeah.
and who's the
Yep.
sub. And, that's something that we sometimes, as we're trying to build our businesses, we start to take on things that are maybe not very well considered. So I love that thought that you've brought forward
Mm.
in the widest net. So thank you about for that. Um,
Yeah, I love that you picked up on that because I think that it can feel counterintuitive for
yeah,
some people of like, why would
Mhm.
I be spending my time promoting other people? And or
right.
it
Yeah.
seems like you're not saying that you are an expert. But really what happens is when you begin to tune into exactly what you can be great at and you have other formidable competitors that come in the ecosystem,
Yep.
then you can say, okay, wow, David is amazing at this. Yes, I cross over a little bit, but how
Mhm.
can I ensure that what I'm focusing on is going to be something that I know that he is really not able to do? And so I think it
Yep.
raises everybody's game, but that is a place where so many people get stuck. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, we've actually spent some time here in our firm with Clifton Strengths. And that's to sort of that point, that identifying what is your strength and realizing that you don't have all 34, and that's okay. The real test is where can you complement each other, and not try to step over each other to trying to be like, oh, it's mine, it's mine. Like, no, it's ours.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's an interesting transition for firms as they get bigger too. That's one of the things I remember being in a conference and David was speaking, and I had the chance to ask the question, well, what is the expertise focus for a really large firm? And I remember his answer was, well, their expertise is in being big. And he wasn't
Mhm.
joking or
Mhm.
trying to be flippant.
Yeah.
I think he was making
Yeah.
the point that, for some clients, it's the size and the weight of the consulting firm that comes alongside. Some people need McKinsey, and McKinsey can do everything, but some people need something a lot more tailored and focused to their particular needs. And we can't all be McKinsey. At some point, though, you're going to grow, and maybe you begin to carefully bring on some of these other expertises within within your organization, your firm. So um, I want to go back to this idea of certification and licensing, because I think this is an idea that is not necessarily on everybody's mind, and particularly if you're in a space like architecture, engineering, or something where there actually is a lot of intellectual property, but I'm not sure that the practitioners in those firms are thinking about it that way. So, could you talk a little bit about what does it actually mean to build a certification program? What separates a good one from one that never really gets off the ground?
Yeah. So let's just define a couple of terms just because I know it can be confusing
Yeah,
sometimes that when we see
good.
different examples. So certification is basically an organized learning experience that you create around a core method that you have created that ensures that people who are being certified have all the knowledge, skills, information, and tools necessary to be good stewards of that methodology.
Hmm.
And so that you can be reasonably sure that you can have some consistent results. Because often at the point in your business where you're really talking about that method, I always say the method is the main character, right? As opposed
Hmm.
to you, the business owner, being the main character. I was just listening again. I have Mike McAllowitz on my mind, but he just did an interview with
Hmm.
Donald Miller from Story Brand,
Yeah.
and so he was just talking about that as an example. I think many people have no idea who Donald Miller is,
Right.
but many people know Story Brand because of the way
Absolutely.
that that method has traveled. And he's
Mhm.
a great example of creating a certification around that that allows many different audiences, individual coaches and practitioners, as well as large companies to bring that method inside. So
Hmm.
the certification is that learning experience. Licensing is a legal agreement that just says exactly what can a certain set of people use for how long, for how much.
Okay.
So that's where, depending upon the materials used, you're setting out those concrete terms and create an agreement around how long it's used. It's like you're doing that, the lease or the loan on it. That company doesn't purchase that IP. They're able to use it for a set period of time for a fee.
Hmm.
And so,
Gotcha.
given that, you have different types of certifications, everything from just think of something like a self study certification that gives you a digital badge on LinkedIn on
Yep.
Excel pivot tables, right? You could do it, it's good for your professional development. That's a particular kind. Then you have a practitioner certification, which could be you have a set of tools. Maybe for somebody who's an architect, there's a specific way that you're building a environmentally friendly tiny home, right? And that you want to have other architects who don't want to study everything that you studied know how to do that reliably and make that part of their
Mhm.
business. And so that could be a practitioner certification where you could be certifying them to be able to use the tools that you use, or maybe the, specific approaches or blueprints or, whatever the things are, so that they can be using it with their clients in their own practice. Then you have a trainer certification if you're more teaching materials. People might be familiar with Brene Brown and her Daring Way, which is a
Hmm.
real popular certification. So people in that certification learn how to teach her methods, and which is a little bit different than just using the tools one to one with clients. They might lead workshops around the Daring Way.
Mhm.
And then finally, you have your enterprise train the trainer models, where you have companies who want to totally bring in house that certification. So you would be certifying internal trainers in a company, let's say in a Google, where they have internal trainers that can then certify and train internal other Google trainers. And then they have a licensing agreement generally around the number of end users who could be impacted. So you
Mm.
think about
Hmm.
that. That's where I say it can often be a long sales cycle, but then it can really be a big check
Yeah.
because where you're bringing in that model, there's what you're selling in terms of training for certifying those end users and making sure they know what they're doing,
Hmm.
so that they're good stewards of the methodology, but maybe they have 10,000 employees, 60,000 employees. And so you can end up having a per license fee. And that's where some of those licensing deals really can get beautiful for the entrepreneur who is using it, because that's really about the end users. So that's just to give you a context for like what it is. And so given that, you need to have 3 core things to make a certification successful. You have to have market fit. Will it sell?
Hmm.
Or
Mhm.
you have
Yes.
something that you're able to communicate it in such a way that people see that it addresses a true problem, challenge, or aspiration that they have.
Mhm.
And you are so compelling and clear that they're willing to cut a purchase order or to take out their credit card to pay for it. That's the thing I know all of us as entrepreneurs are always looking for. You could have the world's greatest idea that you are convinced is going to change the world, but if it is not something people care about now, or if you do not have the marketing savvy to know how to really create that message, it's not going to
Right.
work.
Hmm.
So,
Wow.
market fit, will it sell? Method, will it work? Means that the actual method that you're teaching works in the real world.
Mm.
Here's where I can get a little judgy McJudger, okay, not
Mhm.
mentioning any names,
Yeah.
and probably jealous too. There's some
Yeah.
people who are so good at selling that I just sit back in incredible jealousy, like, I can't believe how many people are buying their thing. Doesn't
Right.
necessarily mean that their thing is actually delivering on the promise, right?
Yeah.
Some people have great market fit skills, but when it comes to the actual method, some of you might have been underwhelmed where you just get super excited about whatever, a real estate package or some kind of
Yeah.
training. And
Yeah.
then you get in there and you're like, this is not actually delivering what I thought it would.
Right.
So there needs to be real deliberate design on the method so that you have just the fewest number of steps possible to be delivering the consistent results. And that experience, looking at the experience side, is extremely important that people have a really great experience learning it.
Mhm.
And then the last piece is your model. Will it stick? And that's where you have a way to be describing it quickly in a way that helps people remember and reinforce the behaviors that you have taught them in the method. And it makes it really easy to be sharing about it. So,
Yeah.
again, something like Story Brand is an example. Like Story Brand, it kind of says something even in the name. It's something that people talk about and spreads easily. The other one I often use as an example is Stop, Drop, and Roll.
Mm.
If we're sitting around the fire and roasting marshmallows and my sleeve catches on fire, hopefully both of you will say stop, drop, and roll.
Right.
There's actually science behind why I do each one of those steps, but the way that it has been described in a model is alliterative, easy to remember, and easy to be reinforcing the method so that
Right.
it
Hmm.
puts fire out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, just to follow up on that for a second. So I think some of our, some of our listeners, they may be in a maybe they're not even in an entrepreneurial situation. They may be in a larger firm. They may be
Yeah.
marketing for a larger service firm, and maybe they do have a methodology. Maybe it's
Mhm.
even a methodology that they've branded, and they've been using that methodology as a point of differentiation. So when we design this, when we build this, whatever, we use the XYZ method, TM,
Mhm.
Circle R. They can spell out what that method is. Their team all follows that method. So
Hmm.
we know it works. We know it can be quantified. We know that they're successful selling it as a firm for themselves as a differentiator. When is the right time,
Mhm.
or are there some times when you shouldn't license or certify other firms, potentially your competitors, to use your methodology?
So I think one could just be, how do you understand your market position? And when you begin to make those kinds of moves, then you're usually making decisions about your fundamental business model and about the future of your business. And again, shifting a bit the messaging around you being the person who is the best able to deliver the
Mhm.
best service
Mhm.
in relation to your competitors. I think each of us, even if you don't necessarily take a very, like they suck and I'm great, kind of branding, you
Right.
still want to be very clear of telling people, I am the person to work with. So when you can shift to that business model where you see that you have ample opportunity, that probably the numbers are going to look much better for you in the long run, where you're really becoming the industry standard for others
Mhm.
Mhm.
and that you have the right capabilities in your company to be doing that such that it's not going to be cutting significantly into the business that you have unless
Right.
some companies slowly begin to get away out of the direct service delivery and they're just doing things about certifying others right in the
Mm.
method,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's where you kind of want to be careful about it so that you don't inadvertently create competitors for yourself. Definitely makes sense, like you're saying, and the larger companies where you might be certifying competitors. I think the play there from a branding perspective is you really are seen as the gold standard. And so
Mm.
people want to be following the method that you have. We think about like the Nordstrom level of service
Right.
that is so well known, and so that when other people are following that method, even if they're your competitors, basically they're saying the gold standard is you. So you're
Yeah.
still maintaining your brand
Yeah.
position from that perspective.
So
What
yeah, if I'm
happens
gonna
often in what were you saying,
I
Jared?
was gonna say if I'm gonna get somebody to apply the method. So go back to Story Brand. If
Mhm.
if I'm gonna work with somebody to execute Story Brand, you could go with someone who's been certified, or you could go with the person who invented it. It's kind of
That's right.
if they're
That's
still
right.
if they are still in the business of doing direct delivery.
Yeah.
And you can see why over time it really doesn't make sense to be in the business of direct delivery, especially if you're somebody like Donald Miller,
Right.
because the main character should be the method. And
Mm,
actually, what is proof of concept that the method works is seeing people other than the founder who are using it and using it successfully and using it in new and interesting markets. Imagine if we take our architecture example with I love tiny homes. I'm kind of obsessed.
mhm.
Because now I'm an open nester and I'm like walking around my big house thinking, do I need such a big house? But let's say we have somebody who has a great method of creating environmentally friendly, beautiful, incredible tiny house. And you begin to see it really replicated in all these cool places around the world. And you see how it's just making such a positive impact and it's growing and growing. There's no way that you could ever be delivering all of those services if you were the one who was doing it.
Yeah.
And really, when your business it becomes such and that it's spreading that way, you actually should be shifting into another mode of really realizing that you're in a different business model now.
Yeah.
I think about Stanford's D School as well. So for design thinking, if you're familiar with Stanford's D School,
Yeah.
that started out of, really understanding that field of how do you teach creativity and design thinking. And they've developed a whole series of specific methodologies and certifications and trainings for other people to come in and learn. And then,
Mhm.
of course, there are, academic projects that happen. There are client projects that happen. I just saw a video with the founder, David Kelly, who has designed all these amazing products, just, working directly with other corporate clients. But there's a lot of application of how people can take that frame of reference and thinking and apply it in their different fields.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's, we're really talking, especially things with, especially the AEC industry, because we're not used to necessarily thinking about intellectual property. I mean,
Hmm.
we think a lot about our craft,
Yes.
and we spend time working on that, but we don't necessarily always think about, well, how could that translate to something else? And I think, when you start making that kind of connection, you're starting to talk about scaling your business.
Hmm.
You're thinking beyond just, "I've got this project to get done." You're thinking, like, to your point, "How does this scale up?" And I know in this podcast, we talk about brand as well, and I
Hmm.
think a struggle that we all have sometimes as we're scaling up is it's very easy to dilute your brand while you do that. But it seems also very interesting to think about this idea of intellectual property,
Hmm.
and we start talking about we're gonna teach others how to deliver our intellectual property. So, kind of wonder how we help leaders kind of protect the quality and authenticity when they are teaching other people to deliver their own stuff.
That does go to me to the process of certification. So
Uh-huh.
it's the way in which there are two pieces. One of them is where you really do architect and codify and spend time through the lens of your craft,
Right.
making sure that what it is that you are doing is truly something that is always the measure, as I said before, of like the fewest number of steps done to such an extent to be getting the consistent output possible. So the fewest number of steps could be 25 or it could be 3, but
Mm.
I think in any great method or craft that you have, you're learning about the essential things that really make it something that is, powerful and unique and differentiated.
Yeah.
Anybody great who I've known, which is like every client I ever get to work with, so I feel like I have the best job in the world, are so thoughtful about what quality looks like.
Mhm.
Usually the hard thing is going through the process of getting it out of the heads of the
Yeah.
founder and maybe some of the key people who do it all day, every day, into a certain kind of codification that could be understood by an audience.
Yeah.
Remember that you get to decide if you ever decide to license or certify people in your method. You get to decide the prerequisites or what would somebody bring in order for them to be ready to go through your certification. So a lot of
Yeah.
people will have specific standards where maybe they wouldn't let just anybody come through because there are things that you can control and things you can't control. Let's say in something like a coaching certification, you would want to make sure that people had a fundamental grasp of coaching
Mhm.
before maybe then you certified them in a very specific kind. Otherwise, in your program, you're trying to teach people how to be a coach and to do your
Mhm.
thing. Same
Yeah.
thing with being an architect, right? There's a whole education process for people to go through and do that that would be a prerequisite for something that you're
To do
moving
something else.
forward. Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that's where you can have, discernment about exactly whom you want to be certifying or who you want to carry things forward. And business owners really just make different decisions about that in all different ways. And to me, there's no right answer because everybody really gets to decide how they do it.
Uh-huh.
Usually there's a span of control where on one hand you have people who say, you know what, you can go through my program and I'm not too tied. You can do what it is that you want with it, sort of a free way of looking at it. Then you have other people on the other end of the scale who might say, I want to be very closely tracking exactly what you're doing and ensuring you have a consistency. And if I find out that you don't, then I'm going to, remove your certification. Um, a lot of that is just based on, your brand, your values, your
Yeah.
approach, your vision.
Mm.
The spot that becomes a spot of tension that is really interesting is where at a certain place, I was thinking about that comment that David was making about, a good company is a big company is good at being a big company because the characteristics that really allow something to travel at scale, like really scale, 100 million, 800 million, billions,
Mhm.
you have to have things dialed in such a way that usually it's hard to have that founder who is the person who, carefully crafted that that methodology themselves. That
Right.
usually that's not at all the same person who's taking it out to
Yeah.
market. Otherwise, it's going to be heartbreaking, and it kind of sucks the joy out
Mhm.
of it for
Yeah.
many people because it's just it's really a totally different kind of business than when you're the person that's in it. But
Yeah.
I think it's an opportunity. One of the missions that I have is just educating more people about this because I
Yeah.
find there is revenue that you may not realize that you could have. Even if you go through more of the process of codifying your methods, of documenting things, if you have the vision down the road of selling your company, it
Yeah.
can make your company more valuable if you actually do have things codified, if you do have a licensing program and licensing deals. And so I find a lot of people are just so hardworking and they care about their client so
Right.
much that all of a sudden they might get to the end of it and they're like, well, I'm done. And
Yeah.
there could have been an opportunity had they designed it differently in order
Yeah.
to do it a little differently.
Well, I think what you're challenging us to do is that we can be so busy in our craft that we're doing the craft, doing the craft, doing the craft. I feel like you're sort of challenging us or somebody to say, you know what, let me stop a little bit. Let me take a little breather and think about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And think about it a little bit different beyond just I'm delivering the next project that you've asked for, the product.
That's right. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
read the John Marlowe's book, Built to Sell.
Mm.
Built to
Okay.
Sell is a tiny little book. You can read it in a weekend. I read it, I think, 18 years into my business, and I was like, what have I been doing all this time? Like, I don't know anything. John's a good friend of mine.
Okay.
He's an example. He has now Value Builder, which is a actual license, like certified method around the approach. But everything about Built to Sell is where you're thinking from the beginning about how you're building a business that is likely to be more saleable. If you're doing that from the beginning, even if you don't decide to sell it, it's going to
Yeah.
run more efficiently. It's going to
Yeah.
be more profitable. It'll be less
Uh-huh.
headache for you. So I say that with great love to a segment of people, and sometimes I've been included, although I think I'm at a stage of my body of work where I'm ready to be a little bit more focused and disciplined. And that
Mhm.
there are some of us who just love to be creative and innovate and come up with new ideas. And that's really the source of joy. So, not everybody has to always think about scaling their business. I think there's a lot of real nonsense standards where we
Mhm.
just have a blanket kind of view that you're only a real entrepreneur if you approach things a certain way or if you grow to a certain scale of business. And I just simply don't think that's true. I think we have a
Gotcha.
lot of choice, but we don't want to, if we don't know about certain options, then sometimes we can just not decide to build that way. And end up in a place where we have to struggle harder at the end. I was
Yeah.
joking with, I don't know if you know Ramit Sethi from I Will Teach You to Be Rich. He has a book and a Netflix special. A good friend of mine I've known for a long time. He writes about personal finance.
Hmm.
And ever since my kids were little, he always said, "Okay, when your kids are old enough, like, let me educate them about personal finance." So I got his book for my son, who's a 20-year-old college student. And so I think it was last year when he was 19. Now he has a high yield savings account. He has an index fund that he's contributing to every month. He's like already putting things away. And we know by the time he gets, even if he's putting, $50 a paycheck in
Right.
right now, by the time he gets to retirement, he's gonna be in a completely different universe financially
Mhm.
than somebody who waited to think about it until their mid-40s or even mid-50s. So it's kind of
Right.
that same principle
Yeah.
where when you think about it earlier on, and it's never too late, it can really make a difference in your current business.
Yeah, on the same, concept, Michael Gerber's, E-Myth, which I think he wrote the first edition of that back in the 1980s,
Yeah.
and has updated it, and he did exactly the same thing, licensed some of the concepts and ideas from it, but he says exactly the same thing. And he uses the word franchise, which is why I think it's embedded in my brain a little bit. I love the idea
Mhm.
of intellectual property being
Yeah.
one of the drivers of doing exactly the same thing, which is codifying your
Mm.
business to the point where it can run without you. Even if you never sell, just the ability to be able to walk away because you know that the team has all of the instruction manual and can do all of the things without you. Um, yeah, that's really powerful. Um,
Yeah, and it really it's helpful. I know there are things for me, Tuckman model of team development, some model I
Mhm. Yep.
learned years
Yep.
ago, the forming, norming, storming, and
Yep.
performing. I will
Right.
never forget that for the rest of my life. And it helps so much. I've used it so many times in my own team and teams that I've worked on and facilitated with executive teams. So there's something that's really wonderful too, just from a legacy perspective of knowing that you've been really useful, that
yeah,
you've created something as in that example is a sticky model of what just helps people normalize what happens when you're forming a team and can actually help many teams perform better. For
right,
me, that's really important to think the work can have an impact beyond your own lifetime.
right.
Yep. Yeah.
So, earlier in the conversation, we were talking about employee experience and client experience, and that's obviously something that we focus on with the podcast, and something that it sounds like you focus on as well. So, you've been in corporate and entrepreneurial environments, both personally and in those who you consult. So I'm wondering, what have you noticed about how this concept of employee experience and the connection to client experience, how does it sometimes clash, or as organizations are growing, as a entrepreneur is starting to add people, or as a larger
Mm.
organization starting to grow? I'm just curious your observations around this interconnectivity between these two ideas.
I think about it a lot, and I used to joke back to my consulting days of doing organizational consulting that you put more than one person together and you get a dysfunctional organization, so my market was unlimited for doing that work.
Yeah.
Actually, that truth is something that is pretty profound that I have seen 100% in huge organizations. I work with some organizations with over 100,000 employees, and with those, they're tiny shops with maybe 1, 2, or 3 people. You can see often that same leadership behavior where people often choose either or. Either
Mm,
they become focused on the internal environment of their team and really having a great place to work, and then maybe they don't have quite the same kind of stickiness with their clients, or they are so focused in the client work that there is a huge disparity between both the way the clients experience the work or the way the market thinks about the brand and
Mm.
the internal experience of what's actually happening in a team. And that is so interesting to me that it does not matter the size of the
mm,
business, that fundamental dynamic is often the same. And usually what it creates is in the case that it's leaning toward just being a great place to work and not, really focused a lot on the client experience,
Mhm.
then you maybe you miss sometimes market opportunity. There's not so much connection with what's happening. Maybe You're not focused on creating systems and processes that really deliver a great consistent experience. And so it's not as rigorous, and maybe you might miss opportunities or not have such a growth trajectory. For companies that just focus on the external environment, they can often have great financial success. But then you have
Mhm.
like this sometimes very like seething, churning, really negative culture where
Mm,
people become very cynical because they see often the external manifestation of a brand that's touted as being great. And again, this could be for just somebody who is very well known and famous who talks about a topic, and then you can see in the inside, right, with the team that they're feeling the misalignment.
yeah.
They're not really um, living what it is that they're talking about on the outside. And so it is not easy to get that balance, which is why I think it's so powerful, the work you're doing, where you're looking at that alignment between it. I do believe that it's
Yeah.
possible to do both. I
Mhm.
think you need to have really, really clear, strong planning, leadership capabilities. You need to have great communication, and you need to be able to be very mature and honest
Mhm.
with employees. Sometimes if I find that you have certain leadership cultures, again, small, medium, or large, where the employees are more looked at just the team that delivers as opposed to grown adults who look at the market and understand that things can shift. They might know that if things happen in the business that they're not guaranteed to be at work forever, but you have a really strong dedication to making sure that they feel supported and things are fair and that they have a chance to grow and develop in their career. These kind of mature conversations can mean often that they're going to be great employees. And even if they
Mhm.
have to be let go if things shift, they're still going to be advocates for the brand. So that's the main thing that I noticed that I think is kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, let's stick there for just a minute about employees, because that is one of the places that's near and dear to my heart, is sort of like how are we sort of creating leadership opportunities? How are we bringing up people? And one of the things when I see examples of it, and other people that are in the same sort of situation or see it as well too. And some of it is that some of the it feels like, I'll say it feels like, that some of the younger generation struggles with maybe what a career looks like and
Mhm.
what it should look like. And that they are really sort of, there's a thing to think about, well, I have to get to here, to here, to here. It's like, what's the next promotion? What's the next thing? And it
Mhm.
needs to happen here, and here's the quickness of it. You, on the other hand, you talk about this concept of a body of work.
Mhm.
And I think it's really interesting to say that, career is really maybe not a linear process, but something that happens over time, and
Mhm.
it grows. Thinking about how we as leaders, think about that when we say, yeah, it's not necessarily linear, it's cumulative.
Mhm.
What kind of advice do you kind of give us as leaders when we look at talent development through the lens of that approach, as opposed to, yeah, it's just linear?
So I think it's so fascinating when you start to talk about generational implications, in which I challenge a little bit. Like you can see within the shared context that we can have in different
Mhm.
generations, there can be a shared context we have if we're around the same age. I'm 59. So, I remember just ways that I saw my parents' career that were
Yep.
shaped based on the norms and the workplace when they were growing up. That said, our parents could actually have given each of us very different lessons in terms of
Mhm.
what career was like and what their career was like. But the context in which we grew up and the expectations we had, there was a fundamental shift between my mom and dad's generation and mine, where we really did begin to see the rift of where, there's a lot more layoffs and there wasn't this idea of you staying with one company for a long time. It began to
Right.
really shift. I remember in the early 90s, and then, of course, just continued through time. So, in the context of different generations, I think we need to understand what is the context from which our younger generations are acting in.
Mhm.
And from that perspective, they have seen a lot and they would be not wise at all to be trusting if they're gonna be around for a long time. They would not be wise to think that the company is gonna care necessarily about their own growth and development. So sometimes for people of my generation can look at them and be like, "Are you kidding me? Do you know how long that I worked in order to get the opportunities I got?" And in my generational context, that is absolutely true.
Yep.
Conversely, when they can understand, which means you need to have dialogue between generations, when they can
Mhm.
understand maybe what is that path that I took? How did I get some of the opportunities? What are some of the ways that I'm working? Is where you can really begin to develop that mutual respect. So I
Mhm.
think, like any good leadership strategy around talent, you really are leaning in and understanding like who individuals are. You're
Mhm.
having conversations about what drives them. I know sometimes I'm in a bit of a different space because I'm often working with entrepreneurs and I'm around young people who I think are extraordinary change makers. They
Yeah.
are absolutely committed. Again, I'll be a mom again, but it's like my son he's on a pre-med track, but I mean, his Notion board and he has his plan laid out for the next 13 years of, exactly where he wants to go. I didn't teach him that.
Yeah.
That's really coming from his own context and his own drive. My daughter's going to school in Paris to study luxury branding. Was it helped to have a mom who's a career coach and was supported? Yes. But I know many, many of their friends who are also doing incredible things at all different
Mhm.
levels of community. So I think if we look at it, and sometimes it's a little bit harder for those of us who have been around a little bit longer, who can have fears, sometimes very well founded, about our sense of security within the work
Mhm.
environment, right? We know what it means to be having a big legacy and a strong body of work, but that's not necessarily what clients or different partners want. So I feel like we always have to be making ourselves relevant. And the core premise for body of work is that your work itself is the thing that really showcases who you are and what you're about. If we're sitting back and we're saying, "Did you know that I've spent 30 years, I've been talking about startup work for, and like I can be that grumpy person in the back of a
Yeah.
room when there's a 22-year-old on stage who's killing it
Mhm.
and doing a great job. What's different is where I show by my work something that gets people excited and shows I
Yeah.
get what's happening currently, it's fresh and it's really relevant. And so that's what we always have to remember is you are only as respected or as good as the last thing that people remember that you created. It's part of the job of an author. You might have written a
Mm.
smash book, but then the next one comes out, it may not do as well. And you really have to have that long tail thread to make sure as an individual
Right.
that you really are fitting your skills into a context that is relevant and that people want to pay for. And it's hard. Like we all have to have humble pie. If we're younger, we can just be frustrated that people may not see our skills and development, but I think on both sides of the sort of generational, side, those are
Right.
things that we need to work on.
And talk about. I think maybe a key takeaway from what you just said is to get the generations within the business to just talk to each other about
Yes.
their
Mhm.
experiences. Because otherwise, I think a younger generation doesn't know what our generation's path was and what
Yes.
Mhm. Right.
we can talk about, the proverbial walking to school uphill both ways in 4 feet of snow kind of mentality.
Right.
It's meaningless because that's not their experience. And we can see or think we see what their experience is, but we can't fear the same things that they fear because we've already moved past that or
Yeah.
that's not our reality. So I love that, and I think I want to bring that back into our business.
Yeah.
So we've been talking for a while. I love this conversation. I could talk with you for another hour. I've got a whole bunch of other questions, but I don't think we have time for them right now. So we're going to have
Yeah.
to do this again. But I want to circle back and just leave our listeners and viewers with something practical. So let's go back to this idea of certification or licensing.
Mhm.
Just help us think about, where do you start? What what signals you that you have intellectual property that's ready for that type of scaling? And if
Mm.
somebody wanted to engage with you to say, would you look at what we're doing here and see if this is something that we could actually license or certify? Just help us quickly think about, what does that look like?
Yeah. So one, just a super clear signal is people are asking you for it.
Mm,
I mean, it really is probably the best things that we work on. I was just doing right before this call. I was just working with a client where they have a big client who was specifically asking them for a scalable kind of way to be bringing their work out one to many into a large organization. And so I know it seems obvious, but that is demonstrating, usually because you have already done work in that client space. Certification and licensing is a mature end of a service strategy. So you
Mhm.
usually have been delivering excellent service over time. You have a strong reputation. People are aware of your work. And so it's not a surprise that they're like, gosh, I love that. I love what it is that you're doing. So if it is that your larger companies are wanting to bring your work inside their company, then that would be where
Mhm.
they just say, "Do you have any options to maybe, like, license your materials?" The same thing is true if you're dealing with more the independent marketer. There are coaches or consultants that say, "Gosh, I just was astounded by the way that you showed up at that meeting and the way that you rolled out that project, and I I don't wanna build that all myself. Like, do you have any kind of certification or licensing? Because I would rather just use your stuff than build it myself." That
Mhm.
from the most, um it what it infers is that you have done work in the process after you have clarified what you do, after you've codified what you've done and tested it and refined it. You're building the case and the need in the market for people to want more about what it is that you are selling. So that's often why people are coming to you with that, is because you've really been talking about that story about what the method can do. When you're working with clients, you don't just show up and deliver great service. You're letting them know through the way that you describe the work that you do, the specific method that you use. I'm not as familiar in your world, of architecture, but I'm imagining
Mm.
that if I'm a new client and I want to build a new house, that if somebody came in and they said, "Yeah, sure, I can do that. And, here's the amount of money and just trust me, it's going to get done," versus somebody who says, "I'm so excited to work with you. Here at our firm, we use a process that has 4 different phases. And, here's the first phase of what we're going to go through. This is why this is important. Here's how we do it." I'd be like, "Oh, that sounds great." Makes me feel a lot
Mhm.
more confident.
Right.
And that's how I'm learning as I'm going through it about what that method is. I think we often forget to be sharing about the main character of the method because we're so used to just talking about ourselves as the ones who are the experts. So that's really the best indicator. Like if you want to hedge your bets about if something is going to be successful or not, it's because you have already done the work to raise awareness of the method that it is something that can work. I have seen it happen in another way where you know that you have something that's really good. There's a very pressing moment of time where you're just meeting the moment where there's a huge need in the market. I think about when we had the shutdown, based on, in 2020 when, all businesses shut down and all of a sudden there were all these people who knew something about delivering virtually and immediately shifting your business into a virtual setting,
Mhm.
that the moment met a need that they had right there. So even if it wasn't the greatest thing ever or they were unknown before, if they could be delivering a solution, then
Yeah.
people were ready for it. So
Right.
those would
Sure.
be kind of the 2 scenarios.
It's great.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Well, this has been amazing. Definitely want to do this again. If you were to leave our listeners, viewers with one key takeaway that you think is the most important thing from our conversation today, what would that be?
It would be to pay attention to what it is that you do. Like, besides you
Mhm.
showing up and just being magic, what is actually happening? If you're not good at observing yourself and noticing what you're going through, just invite a colleague to pay attention. And it could be something as simple as leading a meeting or doing, part of your day-to-day work, but just begin to pay attention to method. And it's one of those things that all of a sudden you're going to begin to see it everywhere. You're going to notice people who talk about the method and what they do, and you're going to be paying attention to great customer experiences that you have
Mm.
as a customer where you may be curious as to what's going on behind the scenes. I almost bet that if you're having a great experience is because people have put a lot of thought into how they're designing and codifying and SOP-ing,
Mhm.
if that's a word, right?
Yeah.
Their process. So just pay attention to that.
Yeah. That's great. Well, let's see. Carl, you have a question you usually ask at the end.
I do. I do. And I know we always talk about, is there is there something that our guest, our audience should be reading or listening to? So is there like a favorite book or a podcast that you found that you say, yeah, y'all need to be paying attention to this? I will say that I would also give a plug for the Widest net.
Hmm.
So I think that one goes without saying. But is there something else that you think that we ought to be talking about as a community?
There is. I'm gonna give you 2 for because I'll give you a book and a
Okay.
podcast, and I'm even gonna reach over. I will say this is my client. However, if she were not, this book, Exceptional Experiences by Neen James, is an incredible book that's based on research by Susan Beyer. Both of you might know Susan
Mhm.
Beyer, Jerry.
She was a guest on the
But
show.
this is really
Yep.
looking at some of the different specific qualities and phases that the luxury levers that companies can look at in order to really build an exceptional experience. I was thrilled to say she just hit the USA Today bestseller list when she came out, so that was very exciting for everyone. But
Mhm.
it is a absolutely wonderful book that gives very clear, specific advice. So that I would say on the experience side.
Gotcha.
And then on the podcast side, I'm a Kit user. I use Kit used to be ConvertKit for email marketing software, and
Mhm.
I love Nathan Barry, the CEO. His podcast, for anybody who's entrepreneurial oriented, he has just a really great format where he's interviewing other entrepreneurs and he really
Mhm.
deconstructs exactly what they're doing. He hosts it live in his studio in Boise. And it's just a really great podcast that usually has very tangible, actionable ways that you can understand how a business is formed. So I listen to every episode of
All
that
right.
podcast.
Oh,
That's
that's
awesome.
awesome.
Well,
Thank you.
for our listeners and viewers, our episode with Susan is coming up soon. It's recorded and it should be dropping in a few weeks. And we actually have Neen scheduled to be on the podcast as well. So very excited about that. We, that's right. We're in
You're
sync.
my Justice League Avenger partners,
Ex-
clearly.
exactly. So, for our listeners, where can they find you online or learn more about your work?
PamelaSlim.com is where you can find us, everything about what we do in the agency. And then LinkedIn is my preferred social network. I'm really active on LinkedIn. I always love to meet new people. So let me know that you heard me on the podcast. I'd love to connect.
That's awesome. All right. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Intangible Brand. If you found value in our conversation with Pam today, please take a moment to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Your service helps us continue to bring these kinds of conversations to all of you.
And if by chance you're watching this on YouTube, please remember to like the video and subscribe to our channel. That is another way in which help other people are helping connect and discover this show and join our own community.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Leave us a review, share your feedback. You can reach us at hello@theintangiblebrand.com. And you can connect with us on LinkedIn or visit our website, theintangiblebrand.com, for more resources and information about the show. So thank you all for joining us on The Intangible Brand. Thank you to Pamela. And remember, the strongest brands are built on the experiences they create, both for their clients and their teams.